Hello. It's good to be with you at another of these gatherings, informal gatherings. Tea with Philip. I've got the most enormous cup of tea here. I hope you have too. And let's explore some ideas together. Type in where you're from. It's great to see that, and let me know if there are any problems with the sound or the vision. Chloe's in London, so that's great. And we little thumbs up for, which presumably means the sound and the vision okay, which is great. So it's lovely to see you. Hi Beatrice, and hi Sarah and Michael. Great. And Sammy, yes, lovely. And so what I wanted to have a conversation about with today is Tara has her fertility in her hand from Halifax in Canada. That's great. What I wanted to talk about today was I thought last week we touched a really rich vein, really. We started talking about community, how we can foster community, and then moved on from there to talk about loneliness, the whole issue of loneliness. And from there, we moved to looking at this idea of paradoxical intention, or a particular way of relating to difficulties, and in this case to loneliness, which involved allowing rather than resisting. So there was a lot of interesting stuff there, and I suggested looking at the film The Fear of 13. As a kind of, as a fascinating example of storytelling and of also these themes. And I just wondered whether if you did manage to see it, do type that in. It'd be interesting to know, and whether you enjoyed it. If this is your first time in the tea here, this is a film that you can find. Unfortunately, it's only on Netflix, I think. There's Jesse saying something I can't avoid this. Is it possible that gallows humor is a social mechanism developed as an echo of paradoxical intention? Well, I guess it certainly relaxes you. It's certainly a way that people deal with the stress of being in a difficult situation, and therefore it brings, I guess, muscular relaxation and a certain sort of almost humorous acceptance of fate. So I think there is probably some connection there. Madzi says that she thought The Fear of 13 was fabulous. It is really an extraordinary film, isn't it? And there's Pamela Kiora from New Zealand, from the other side of the world. How lovely. Yes, very intense, says Sonia. It was an intense film, extraordinary film. So if you haven't seen it, do have a look at it. And we've got Isalinda from Portugal. That's lovely. And Dustin and Bose, Ohio. So what I really wanted to do is kind of carry on exploring these ideas, because you notice that these events, these meetings that we're having together, are billed as a conversation. And it'd be quite reasonable for you to say, well, let's face it, it's not really a conversation because you're the one who's talking. And, okay, we can type a little bit, but actually you're giving a talk and we're listening in. But I beg to differ, and I think it is a conversation on three counts, really. One of them is to do with where I'm coming from, my attitude. It's very different to give a talk, giving a lecture, standing up and giving a lecture, sort of didactic one-way flow. If I approach, and I do this when I'm giving talks often in Glastonbury and different places as well, if I feel as if I'm amongst equals, I'm amongst friends, and I'm exploring ideas, and I just happen to have the floor at the moment, but then somebody else will have the floor, people have the opportunity to join in. That's where it's coming from. And there's a second reason why I think it's a conversation as well, which is you can actually contribute. You can type in comments, and you can also type them in afterwards, which in a way might be easier for you, because the tricky thing I know about typing in during a live discussion is you kind of miss, if you're somebody like me who can't walk and chew gum, who can only do one thing at a time, as soon as you start typing, maybe you miss what's being heard, but maybe you can multitask and it's easy for you. But the point is that you can join in the conversation later. And of course, it's not ideal. It'd be lovely if we were all sitting around together. But what a wonderful opportunity and privilege to be talking to Kroll in Portugal and Irene from Athens and Pamela from New Zealand and Laurie from Ontario, that we're all able to do this. So there are limitations, of course, but let's make use of this fantastic medium. And you could even argue that in a way, you could say it's better than a standard conversation because it's recorded. And so if an idea triggers something for you, you can look back at it. You've got time to mull it over, and in a couple of days' time, you can type in another idea that's come to you and so on. And then there's a third reason why it's a conversation, I think, which is that we're involved in an ongoing process here. So that what happens in one particular 20-minute period of time we spend together has an influence on the later periods of time. And let me give you an example of this. A few weeks back, I asked people to suggest what we should explore in these conversations together. Lots of suggestions came through, which were lovely. And one suggestion was somebody who said, the mouth of the river. Let's talk about the mouth of the river. And I was fascinated by that because, what on earth do they mean? I thought. But it's connotative. It's like a dream. It's like a symbol. And immediately I started to think about it. And of course, it's the most powerful idea, really. The mouth of the river is where we're by a tidal river here in Lewis. And if you're on a tidal river, there's this conversation between the sea and the river that moves backwards and forwards. And think about the great sort of river deltas of the world, the Nile Delta, the basis of the whole ancient Egyptian civilization, the fertility there, the Mekong Delta, which is known in Vietnam as the delta of the 9 dragons, the 9 rivers that join it. The Ganges, the delta of the Ganges that joins with the Brahmaputra and forms one of the most fertile regions in the world in the Bay of Bengal. So the mouth of the river is a fantastically fertile place. And that's, I think that's what it triggers for me anyway, this image of the mouth of the river, that wherever there is confluence, wherever there's meeting of cultures, of ideas, of discourse, there's the possibility for fertility and creativity. So how fantastic is that? And so that is what I think we're working with, and it's flowing and connecting, and each session connects with the one before. And I want to, and the people who were really who really kind of got this were the New England transcendentalists, the people like Thoreau and Emerson and Mary Fuller and Bronson Alcott. And they took this idea of conversation as a way of learning. Of course, it has an ancient lineage back to Socratic dialogue and so on. But with this idea of conversation, Emerson wrote an essay about it, and there's a quote that I want to give you, and I've got a link for it, which I'll put on the blog post to go with it. And it's a quote from a book called Transcendentalism and the Cultivation of the Soul by Barry Andrews. And he says, the role of conversation in the Transcendentalists' pursuit of self-culture cannot be overstated. They would have readily agreed with the words of French essayist Michel de Montaigne, who wrote, "In my opinion, the most profitable and most natural exercise of our mind is conversation. To me, it is a more agreeable occupation than any other in life. Reading," he said, "is a passive activity, whereas conversation instructs and exercises us at the same time." And then there's a fantastic bit in this article. It goes on to say that Emerson thought of conversation as a kind of collective midwifery by which each participant helps to bring the latent thoughts of others to consciousness. So isn't that a fantastic thought, to think that we might be being midwives to each other to help give birth to new ideas and creativity? It's just fabulous, I think. And to give an example of how we're in this river together, as it were, swimming, and the ideas we're being midwives to each other. I just want to share with you some of the feedback from the previous session, because you may not have seen them, and I just think they really merit consideration and further consideration. And if your quotation isn't here, it doesn't mean to say it's not as important. It's just, there's obviously a limit to the amount that I can read out. Listen to this. Corinne said, in thinking about the idea of not resisting feelings of loneliness, years ago, I heard this powerful little story. A butterfly was flying around a temple, free and happy. But then it flew up into a temple bell. It flapped its wings and tried to get out. After fighting for ages, it became very tired. It finally accepted it wasn't going to get out and stopped flapping its wings. It let go and, of course, fell downwards and was free. This story is always with me, says Corinne. In the last 3 years, I've had moments of great despair and loneliness. I realized the solution involves not only embracing and accepting, but also letting go of everything you want in that process. Love, attention, friends, feeling better. Aching for all that eats your energy. It was in those moments of really wanting nothing at all, letting go, that I had 2 very special moments of feeling so loved beyond everything. Those moments have been rare, but they have saved me. Totally letting go, not asking or wanting. It made me feel that I was just a soul connecting with, yes, the universe. This was such a gift, and I can go back to those moments when I want to. You have to go through the gates and transformations on your own, but we are not alone. And then a number of people drew out the distinction we need to make between loneliness and solitude. Jessie said, I often crave solitude as a remedy to the loneliness of living surrounded by people. That's fantastic, isn't it? And Kathy said, as an introvert, I have felt both the sadness and the comforting renewal of aloneness. The older I get, the more I enjoy the silent connection with all. And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? It's how good it can feel to sit in what one might call a meaningful silence together. And I often feel like that in our meetings together when we do the meditations at the end, and there's just a brief pause, just a moment of silence. And yet there's a beautiful feeling of connection. It's possible to have that. And then just a few more quotes for you. Sammy wrote, thank you so much for touching on this fascinating and somewhat emotive subject. I've lived on my own on and off for a few years now, and for various harsh reasons, it's been one of the biggest struggles in my life. I persevered, and after years of self-love practices and consolidating hobbies and practices and relations, I'm now finally the happiest I've ever been. It's definitely a skill to be happy alone that we don't all naturally possess. And I have a lot of time and sympathy for people who struggle with isolation. And then she gave a real clue. She said, I'm less lonely now. I spend more quality time with myself. And that's an interesting idea, isn't it? We think of quality time in relation to being with other people. But how nice to relate that to one's own self, to giving quality time to oneself. And then Todd said, sitting under a willow always makes me feel better, which introduces us to the idea that trees can be our friends, as of course can other plants and animals. And we may have no friends. We may be estranged from our family or just not feel kind of in connection with them in a deep way. But the truth is that we're always held within the embrace of nature, the wider family of all of nature. And then when one connects with that, and I guess that's one of the reasons why we follow a spiritual path, why we might be following Druidry or Nature Way, is to feel that connection with the wider family of nature, which is so beautifully expressed in Mary Oliver's poem, you know, that finishes, "Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things." And I love the way she says family of things, you know, because so she's not only saying living things like animals, plants, trees, but things. It reminds me of reading Jung's autobiography, Memories, Dreams and Reflections. And he talks about when he's living in the Bollingen Tower by the lake, and he's going through this tricky experience that some people called a breakdown, other people said an opening or whatever. He names everything, including his frying pans. His frying pan is called, you know, Fred, and the saucepan's called Jane, and so on. And so he names everything. So everything's alive, including the saucepans. So these are some thoughts, and really to illustrate how we are building something together, we're exchanging things. And the point about ideas, you see, I think, is that they're living beings. Ideas give birth to other ideas. I just saw, it reminds me, an image came to my mind. I saw last night The Shape of Water, another extraordinary film. And there's a scene in it where she's looking out of the window of a bus, and the camera focuses on the drops of water, and 2 drops of water just join together and become 1 drop. It's very beautiful. And of course, in that context, it's talking about love. You know, she's falling in love, and the union that brings. But ideas come together like those drops as well, and form bigger ideas and form connections and relationships. And so let's now have a little bit of meditation. Let's just enjoy the fact that we're all together now, and that however lonely we are, no matter how lonely or however alone we might be, just us and the computer, just ourselves and the computer, in reality, we're part of this great web of connection and of light, part of many webs. This one web and connection we're in now is this web that's connecting hundreds of us all over the world. And we picture that as being together in a sacred grove. We see ourselves sitting in a sacred grove, and there are still people arriving, companions arriving from every direction, and just quietly sitting and getting settled. And you know that moment when you join a group, a meditation group, and you've had all the anxieties of the day, but you sit down and you just kind of let those anxieties fall away from you, like a bit of dust that's gathered on your jacket, just falling down into the ground. And you close your inner eyes. You still feel that connection with everybody sitting in the circle, all equal, just looking around, closing your eyes, and then just allowing a sense of the earth beneath you, feeling the strength and the stability of the earth. And you can feel the life of the earth, and you can feel the way all that life, the creatures in the earth, the stones and minerals, the rocks and the crystals, the water, the subtle energies that are just flowing through you, a part of you. And you can feel your body being calmed and energized, feeling at one with the earth. And as you breathe in, you start to become aware of the roots of the trees, to the circle of trees around you. And you sense the presence of these trees, their strength, their calm, their magnetism or vitality. And you breathe in and you can smell the trees. the essential oils that they're excreting from their leaves and from their bark and sap. And you breathe those oils in, and you can feel them going into your lungs and into your blood. So the trees are invigorating you in the very deepest way. And you feel their health and their life flowing through you. And you become aware of the sky above you. And you breathe in the energy of the sky. And the energy of the sky meets the energy of the earth within the center of your being. And there's nothing to do, nothing to think or feel, just being. Being here with the earth and the sky and the trees. And you sense that the light is dawning. The sky is becoming lighter, and then you hear the cry of the wild geese. And it's coming closer, and then you start to see high above you a flock of wild geese flying overhead. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. And feeling the sense of community in the circle of companions sitting around you, blessed by the earth, the trees, and the sky, and the wild geese, you slowly open your psychic eyes and you look around you in the grove, and you imagine stretching your hands out and placing the palms of your hands on the ground. And you give a blessing to the earth, a blessing to all lives, and then a blessing on your life too. And you bring both your hands together to your chest, to your heart. You imagine bringing your hands up from being on the earth to coming up to your heart, so you feel the warmness of your palms in your chest, in your heart. A blessing on our lives, a blessing on the land. And then slowly you open your eyes to find yourself sitting in front of your computer, your tablet, or your phone. And we've come to the end of our session. And I'm going to now make another cup of tea so it's hot. And I'll pop this up on YouTube and on my blog. On the blog, I've written some notes and I've got a link to the article on the Transcendentalists' use of conversation. And then I will take great pleasure in reading what you've written. And in a few days' time, I'll have another look, because some more thoughts may come to you about this process, this adventure, this conversation that we're embarked on. So lots of love, lovely to see you, and hopefully see you again next week. Okay, bye.